Welcome to the All Things Real Estate Podcast with our very own Josh Barker. With more than 20 years of experience and over 5,000 properties sold, Josh brings a unique perspective to the real estate market. Let's get started.
Okay, Josh. Well, it's been, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's been a month.
It has been a month.
I like how I look, there's nothing there. Okay, still nothing there. Excellent.
He's checking us again.
Yeah. So, and it's August.
It is.
So, we were talking before the camera started rolling, there was like several topics because the landscape is moving. Things are shifting a lot. There's a lot of concern. Some of the things that you were talking about, we were talking about interest rates and, the current inventory. But a big topic that you talked about insurance, especially for people that outside of the area, insurance has gone up a lot.
Yeah, it has.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, for example,
Shingletown. Shingletown. Yeah, it's I think it's an effect of what the state's doing too, right? Mm-hmm. So the state is putting a lot of pressure on the wildland fire interface and trying to push a lot of people back into cities. They're probably not really putting a lot of pressure on insurance companies because insurance companies are, for the most part, they're getting very aggressive on how much they're charging in these forested areas. So Shingletown right now is probably a prime example of that. So for our listeners, Shingletown is a community that's to the east of Redding. It's up a hill. It's about 25 minutes away. So for listeners that might be in Sacramento, just kind of think of like Auburn, kind of going up the hill into Auburn, totally. Kind of a thing. But and so Auburn might be even dealing with this too. I'm not sure, but a few years ago, before all the fires, that we really started to see it at a higher volume, you had insurance was probably, let's say, $1,200-$1,500 a year for those places up there in Shingletown for just the average type of home. And today, that same property is probably somewhere between $4,000 and $5,000 per year. So it's and
that's huge. That's a huge impact on your monthly payment.
It's huge. Yeah.
You just went from $100 to potentially $400 a month.
Yeah, exactly. And it has an impact, obviously, on what you can afford to buy.
Yeah.
And we've had numbers that are even higher than that too, much higher than that in terms of insurance. I mean, I've gotten some scary quotes that are much higher than that. So I think it's a challenge. I think it's a challenge for property owners that are up there on the mountain right now because they recognize that, they might be grandfathered in with a lower insurance premium. But as soon as the property changes title, the new buyer has to, be subject to new rates. And they're not grandfathered in. So that's playing into value in Shingletown right now. So everybody's dealing with interest rate increases, but Shingletown's dealing with interest rate increases and the increase in the fire insurance premiums themselves.
And it's probably not just Shingletown. I mean, it's all the areas that have heavy trees.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
No, yeah. Insurance companies right now have these maps that they're doing massive overlays on, and it's proximity to water access for fire hydrants, full-time fire stations, ingress and egress. There's a whole lot of considerations that go into their fire mapping, but Shingletown, unfortunately, is rated essentially as being a pretty high risk for insurance carriers, and so the rate's higher. And if you go all the way down the foothills of the Sierra Nevadas, and also true for the west side of town too. If you get up into Weaverville and places between here and French Gulch and all that, it's kind of the same thing where these higher risk fire areas, they're suffering some much higher fire insurance premiums now.
To me, that's a perfect example of when we talk about the market, and it's not just when you and I talk about it, but when people talk about the market. And I've always tried to say, like, okay, well, that's a very general term. Within the market, you have the state market, you have the Redding market. Yeah. This is, even within this area, suddenly that's pressure. You go 25 miles east, and that's going to be pressure on the listing price of a home. Oh, yeah. Because they're like, well, they're going to have to pay $300-$400 more per month for insurance that they didn't have to pay, just like interest rates. Yeah. That's just another thing of even within this market, you now have segments that are outside of the city limits that it's going to be that headwind pressure that brings down the listing price.
It is. And it's happening up and down the state of California. I mean, it's not just localized to our region only. It's really up and down the state. I mean, the state is continuously to focus on infill. They want to see more and more development inside of cities. They want to see less population in the wildland fire interface. They're coming out speaking about it all the time. If you guys were to go on YouTube right now and watch the governor speaking at the last state of California meeting that he did, he spent probably 25 minutes talking about that. They're 100% on it. So, for me, I'm looking at it going, well, I don't think they're going to put a ton of pressure then on insurance carriers to lower premiums in the wildland fire interface. because I think ultimately they're trying to push populations into cities. And so, it's going to be challenging for those that are already out there. I don't know if, this increase in insurance is going to remain or if it's going to change, but right now it's hard. It's hard on a lot of them.
Yeah. And it makes sense. I'm not going to be somebody that aligns himself with politicians or anything, but I get it. It's if infrastructure.
Yeah.
I mean, because, the fires that we have seen and the destruction we've seen, nobody wants to see that.
No.
And so everyone wants to see that go away.
Yeah.
But it's like, how do you get rid of it? Then,
It's tough.
I mean, unless somebody can figure out how to make it rain all the time, I mean, we're kind of like, at the mercy of. And when we've been driving around, my wife just went down to Piedmont and we just went over to the coast and we were talking about the water shortage is an issue everywhere. Like just driving to the coast, normally the trees looked a lot better than they do this time of year.
Yep.
It looks dry,
Yep.
real dry. It's kind of scary. In fact, when we came back, there were those lightning strike fires that started outside of Willow Creek and Sawyer.
Yeah, 6 Rivers or something like that.
Yeah, something like it was when we were headed over. It just happened the night before, so you could see smoke. We're like, "What's going on?"
Mm-hmm.
Found out, but when we came back 2 days later, I mean, we drove through. It was kind of eerie.
Yeah.
It was. I was like, "Should we be on this highway?"
Well, before we segue onto another topic, let's. I just want to kind of tie a loop around this real quick.
Sure.
A lot of the clients that we have that have had a hard time with insurance in those wildland interfaces, they have some options at the state level. They have what's called, I think it's a California Fair Plan, where they'll actually work with you to insure your property. It doesn't insure your personal contents, and so oftentimes what they'll do is they'll get a second policy, almost like a renter's policy for the personal contents. But they can get their fire insurance through this California Fair Plan, and then they get their own extra insurance rider for their personal property through a normal insurance carrier. So there are workarounds, but it's challenging. So just wanted to share that for our listeners in case you're going, hey, I'm stuck. Who do I talk to if I can't find insurance? I'd consider starting there.
And I can imagine all of the buyer's agents at Josh Barker know that when they dealing with a buyer, they let them know about that.
Oh, yeah. Our agents are educated on it. They can share it with the clients and
Absolutely.
walk them through that. I mean, we have clients that we're selling homes for up in Shingletown right now. And so us resourcing some of those insurance options for buyers is a big part of what we have to do.
Awesome.
Yeah.
There you go. So some of the other things you and I were talking about, we were talking about headwinds and tailwinds. We always talk about that because those are the big things that kind of are dictating the market.
Yep.
Right. And we were talking about, I've been very bullish on one of the tailwinds. The two biggest tailwinds, well, I guess there's 3 really big tailwinds. One of them is interest rates. Mm-hmm. I mean, when interest rates are in the high 2s, people are dumping out their 401k to buy real estate. It just like, it makes sense, right?
Yeah.
But they're not there anymore.
No.
So that huge tailwind is now arguably a headwind.
Yeah.
Another big tailwind is obviously inventory. If there's no inventory, people start to get a little bit, it's the classic supply and demand.
Yep.
No supply, demand doesn't have to be, all it's got to do is be a little bit higher than supply and boom, things can get a little bit squirrely. The last one though, is we had a lot of people moving in the area. There was a lot of telework. There was a lot, COVID really amplified that. Yeah. And that's what you're seeing is that's not that way anymore.
No, I mean, it's starting to change obviously. So, I mean, there's a lot of stuff in what you just said. If you talk about the people coming in from out of the area, if you want to go over that for a minute, we have seen that slow down recently over the last 6 months. Part of it's because a lot of those markets they were coming from, they're kind of subject to the same issues we're having right now, which is buyer demand is going down. And so it's taking them longer to get their property sold. Maybe the price in which they're selling for is having an impact on some of their decision-making, things like that. But what we're really starting to see is just this transition away from a pandemic-related work practice to a more normal work practice. So a lot of these companies, during COVID, obviously, they're letting them work from home, gave them total flexibility in where they might have wanted to live. And so a lot of folks were looking at, Redding being a great place to go, which we totally agree. But now that these companies are, saying, hey, it's time to come back to work, and they're starting to bring people back into these companies, physically into these workspaces. And that's reducing some of the options that buyers used to have. So that's why I think we're seeing some of that decline in buyers coming in from outside of the areas. Is some of it's because of that. An unrelated issue, but kind of along what we're going to see going forward is that we're starting to see some layoffs in some of these larger, bigger companies. You guys are probably, our listeners here probably heard about, some of the bigger tech companies doing some layoffs. And a big part of that was that, when COVID hit, they had to send a lot of people home. And that kind of caused the productivity to drop a little bit. So they needed more people to do the same work they were doing before COVID, right?
Yeah.
And now that people are coming back into the office again, the productivity is beginning to go up again. And so what that's causing is the employers to say, well, now we can start to reduce our number of employees because we're getting more productive now. My phones are ringing, sorry.
You're a wanted man.
I'm a wanted man. So we're getting more productive, or these companies are getting more productive as people come back in the office. And so they're able to lay off, not be able to, but as a result, they're laying off people that they don't feel as necessary. So that's changing it as well.
So we had several big tailwinds that are either arguably neutral or are now headwinds.
Yeah, that one's probably more of a just neutral? a softening of a tailwind.
Versus
a headwind.
Rate.
The biggest headwind of all right now is interest rates.
Yeah.
And for people,
where are they?
Well, right now they're at about 5.5% today,
which historically is still so low.
It is.
You know what I mean? Historically speaking, it
is. But you know what, Joey? The challenge with the people don't necessarily think about in that same thought is the pricing of homes pushed up so high as a result of lower interest rates.
2.875 and stuff.
Yeah. So the history of it, if you look at rates 6-7 months ago, they were as low as 3.25%. Yeah, which you would agree is a low rate, right?
Oh, it's yeah. It's almost free money.
Yep, that's right. Then it pushed up about a month and a half ago to a height of about 6.5%. And so what happened is that you had median sales prices that were pretty high. And you had the median buyer that was now qualified at 30% less once the rates went up. And so that delta, if you will, the difference between those two was 30%. And it's like, well, volume is going to slow down because the average buyer now is qualified at 30% less than they were, 6 months ago. And home prices are still too high to adjust for that. And so what we've seen in the market is we've seen the volume start to drop off as a result. But there's been some things on the ground that have changed. One is that pricing has come down. Everybody has their own opinion on this overall, but I would say that most people would agree pricing has already softened between 8 and 10%.
Well, you said last time D.R. Horton had reduced their prices by 10%.
They did.
This was brand new construction.
Yeah, and now they're selling a little bit. I was just out there this last week walking those properties out there. They had a little over 50 homes total that they're building. They already had 12 in escrow when we were out there. Okay. So there was 12 of them already under contract. And a lot of that was after they went in there and made some adjustments on their pricing. So they found the market. But they found the market instead of being at 490, they found the market at 430. 430,000 instead of 490,000. So that's just an example. And of course, a builder's a lot different than a homeowner because a builder's going to just, like that one anyway, because of them being a national home builder, they work in reality. They're not going to fall in love with their product. They're going to sell it. And so they're going to face reality and do what they have to do to sell a product. Homeowner may not do that. Homeowner might say, hey, if I can't get the number I need, well, then I'm not going to do anything. And that's a totally fine answer, of course.
Or my neighbor got this 6 months ago.
Yeah.
And it's like, when interest rates were 3%, you're right. But at interest rates, the same buying power is now, 10% less. That's that whole point you're trying to make of, well, the person that purchased that house, let's say $600,000 at 3.25%.
Yeah.
Now they're looking at 5.5% to get the same monthly payment. That has to come down.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
You're
a
right.
lot. That's almost 2%. That's over 2% increase in interest rates, which I think you had a rule that you used for every percent. It goes down 10%?
Yeah. For every 1% the interest rate increases, it takes away the buyer's purchasing power by up to 10%. And so when rates jumped 3 full percent, that was a 30% impact on purchasing power. That's where you had that disparity between the median home and then the median buyer and what they qualified for. But prices have, like I said, they've softened a little bit, 8 to 10%. But rates have come down a little bit too. They were at a high at 6.5. Today they're at 5.5%, which means that a buyer's purchasing power has increased on average by a full 10%. Right. So now the delta, if you will, between median home price and what a median buyer qualifies for, it's sitting right around 10, 12% is what the difference is. And so does that mean the market's going to go down that far? Well, no, I don't know. I mean, it depends on a whole lot of things like, what is wages going to be, what interest rates are going to be in the future, how many homes are on the market. Right now, home inventory is holding very, very strong. It's not going up really drastically at all at this point. Which is actually very surprising. I mean, if there's anything in this story that is really helpful is the fact the inventory is not exploding right now.
So last time I think we were at the replenishment rate was like 2.1. Was that right?
Yeah.
It was in the twos.
Yeah.
And 3 and under is considered a seller's market.
Yes.
4, 5's neutral.
Yep.
Anything 6 and above is a buyer's market.
Exactly.
So are we still you're saying we're still in the twos?
Yeah, we're on the tail end of a seller's market. We're in the mid twos in terms of an absorption rate, how many months of supply we have, and how long would it take to sell off the supply if nothing else came up for sale. So that's where we're sitting right now, and I think what's happening is that a lot of these homeowners are sitting on interest rates at 3.25%, and they're going, you know what? If I were to sell my home right now and downsize, or sell my home and buy a similar newer home, or sell my home and upgrade, they're going to have to give up that 3.25% interest rate.
Yeah.
And by going in now, they're going to buy a home at a 5.5% interest rate. And the payment is just such a shocker, I think, in a lot of cases, that I think a lot of sellers are saying, you know what, I think our best option is to stay. At least that's what they're saying right now, at a larger number. And I think that's contributing to an overall lower home inventory, which is great. I mean, right now, having home inventories that are sitting in the mid sevens, for single family homes right now, that's helpful, because when inventories start climbing, when that absorption rate climbs, and it goes from a mid twos to a 4 or 5 month supply, that's when you start to see days on market extending. It takes longer to get a home sold. You start to see prices soften even more aggressively, a lot of significant price reductions. That's when you start to see a lot of major changes, if that happens.
Are you guys, so is there a time frame when you have a listing that you say, hey, we've been listed this long, that kind of tells us maybe we're overpriced for the market? Because this is fluctuating so fast. I mean, these numbers are all over the place. Somebody's going to, that traditional comparable market analysis includes previous sales. So like we said, in normal times, it would be, you would pull a home sale in your neighborhood from 6 months ago. Pull a few, but you're like, well, it's kind of hard to use that one because those buyers got 3.25%.
Yeah.
And these buyers are going to get 5.5%. Yeah. So I can imagine if I'm going to sell my home and I come to you and I'm like, well, my neighbor got this and my other neighbor got that. And you're trying to explain to me, I get it, but the market has shifted pretty quickly. Yeah. And it's because this, you're trying to help them sell their home. They're trying to get the absolute most they can. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And we're past that kind of the peak of that. So is there a time frame on market where you go, hey, look, we should look at changing the price? Is there like a standard or a rule or anything like that?
Well, it's price range dependent and the type of property that you're selling, right? So, like we have a few properties that we're selling right now that are in a retirement community. Well, just the fact that it's a 55 and over, right? That's going to limit the market a little bit. And so our market times, or how long we sit before we make recommendations, is going to be a little bit longer than just a normal, home in a subdivision somewhere. If you have a 2-story home versus a 1-story home, a 2-story home is going to limit your market a little bit because there's more people that want a 1-story than a 2-story, right? Yeah. And so because of that, it might take a little bit longer to find the ideal buyer. So that would be a reason to make a recommendation that's a little bit different. Another one would be maybe the price point itself. If it's a higher price property where the buyer demand is lower, then oftentimes it takes a little bit longer of a period of time before you're going to find the ideal buyer. And so it really comes down to an individual product. I think the best thing that you can really do is that when you do your comparables, when you look at all the homes that are similar to yours that you're selling, right? So if I'm in a retirement community, I'm only going to use retirement community homes as my examples. What I would want to do is to make sure that I look at what the average is for those comparables. So if I'm going to use 2-story home, use a lot of 2-story homes. What's the average market time for 2-story homes? And so that way, when you sit there and determine like when would be a good time for us to make an adjustment on price, if we're not, hitting the target, you and the owner, the agent and the owner should have already identified what period of time that you're going to go before you're going to really make a decision on what to do next. And it's, a lot of it's in the data. Our agents are trained to follow the data.
I would think this would be the hardest market to do that in because you're coming out of such a hot market that was driven by such low interest rates, and it's still so fresh. Meaning like another year from now, you'll have a year of 5 and 6% or whatever interest rates, and so things will level out. But you still are, you're coming out of that white hot. Yeah. These are the hardest conversations. Because there's this, I remember there was this, there was a meme, but there's a couple of points on it, and it showed these 3 kids, and one had first place, second place, and third place. Maybe you saw it, and the first place was happy, and the second place was like mad and kind of look at the first place, and the third place kid was really happy. And they were talking about, they even did a survey of Olympians.
Yeah.
And the happiness of bronze medal winners versus silver medal winners were much higher, because the silver,
they almost were there.
Because the silver, all they could think about was how close they were to gold,
Yeah.
and the bronze were like, oh my goodness,
I'm on the podium.
Yeah, I'm on the podium. And so you get that when a seller comes to you and you're like, hey, they're like, oh look, all my neighbors got this last December.
Yeah.
So
Well, you
they're
can
not
shift
thinking
it.
like, yeah, but look at how much more you got than if you would have sold 2 years ago. Look
Yeah.
at how much equity you create. The mind.
Yeah, well, you go through a grieving process, right? And I don't
Yeah.
remember all the stages to that. I mean, the people here that have degrees in psychology, I'm sure know all that stuff. But yeah, I mean, if you thought that your home was worth X and it turns out it's only worth Y, and that's a surprise to you, then you got to go through a grieving process to accept the new reality. And depending on what kind of pressure you're under or what your reasons are for wanting to sell in the first place, you'll find a way to justify it. One thing that a lot of people do, though, that I hear all the time from sellers that are, basically exchanging a position in the market, right? So they're selling their home here, that's great, and then they're going to go buy another home here, that's great. If the market's down, fine, you're selling for a little less, you're buying for a little less, right? If the market's up, you're selling for a little bit more, and you're buying for a little bit more. And so if you look at it from that perspective, most people, they're not moving strictly based on investment. They're moving for their life. They're moving for a life decision. I need more room for the kids, or I'm moving to follow my grandkids, or whatever it might be. And so they'll kind of make decisions for different reasons. But the other thing that we look at too when you're talking to sellers on the pricing piece is when the market's going up, we almost always price based on actives. Mm-hmm. You look at active inventory, what's currently for sale at that moment, because that's how you target the highest price for the home, right?
Yeah.
When the market's flat, sold data tends to be good data, because market's not changing that much. Sold data kind of gives you the storyline, and then you know what you could expect. When the market's going down, pending data
Got it.
is really what you're looking for. You're looking at homes that are currently went under contract, because that is the pulse of the market at that moment, is the pending data. So, we train our agents to basically, based on market conditions, is when you make different types of recommendations, because the strategy changes when the market changes.
Of course.
But as long as you spend the time with the homeowner and just kind of walk through here, nationally, what's going on, countywide, this is what's going on. Here's what the comps are doing that are similar to your home. And then, based on that, walk them into it. I think most people get a pretty good understanding of what the options are.
So I'm going to ask you to pull out your crystal ball
Oh boy.
and magic 8-ball.
Yeah.
Answer this. So we've
8-ball.
got about 5 months left in 2022.
Yep.
What are do they still have projections of interest rate increases? What are what's the if somebody did research, they could say, well, at least this is what they say is going to happen. What do you see over the next 5 months?
Most of the experts right now, I think, are pretty satisfied with, or a lot of the companies are pretty satisfied with a coupon of 4.5 to 5. So I think interest rates being in the mid 5s is probably what most consumers are going to see on Main Street for a while, based on everything that I'm reading. I wouldn't necessarily disagree with that. I think it's probably going to be a realistic number. And remember, interest rates aren't necessarily set by the Fed. They're more set by how many people are purchasing those mortgage-backed securities. Mm-hmm. And right now, it seems like there's a pretty healthy appetite for buying mortgage-backed securities, and in that mid 5 range for the consumer on the street.
Okay.
All right. And so that's one piece. But the thing we're all going to have to look at is the delta that I was talking about earlier. The median home right now is selling for 10 to 12% higher than what the median buyer can afford. And so there's a few things that have to be figured out in that situation. I mean, if rates soften by 0.5%, that increases purchasing power by 5%. So right now rates are going to play a very large role on what values do going forward. So watch the rate. If the rate goes down, the market's probably not going to have to adjust very much more in terms of pricing. If rates go up for some reason, that's not good news. That's going to likely have an immediate impact on value.
And so out of all the tailwinds that we were talking about, we don't see much of a change in inventory. You said that's steady.
Yep.
We do see a decline in people moving in the area from out of the area.
Yep.
And so the interest rate seems to be, as the interest rate goes, so goes the market for now.
Yeah. I mean, the interest rate is probably going to be the one for most people on Main Street are like, well, what do I watch for? Just watch rates. Right now, if rates stay at the rates that they are right now at 5.5%, the pricing might soften a little bit more, but we're certainly not in a position where it's going to be a terrible thing. If rates spike, know there's some bad things coming. And if rates go down, then expect that the home's pricing will probably flatten out, or if anything, start to tick up again if rates were to drop. So that's rates would be what I would be staring down and keeping a really close tab on. But keep in mind too, though, that big picture, there's a lot of good things out there. I mean, first of all, our home inventories nationally are still low, 4.5 million to 5 million units short. And I think a lot of what's going to be done to contribute to improving that is not going to be single family homes. It's going to be multifamily.
Okay.
Multifamily is going to be what's probably going to be the greatest growth in the future, at least in the near term, is because that they're going to solve the problem much faster than single family can. So I think,
makes sense.
Yeah. But volumes, don't be confused by us as real estate agents out there in the market today complaining. Okay. Because you're going to hear a lot of complaints about, sales being down. Sales being down does not mean prices necessarily have to be down. Mm-hmm. The volume of home selling is going down right now. That impacts agents only, right? And then people affiliated with what a house sells, well, the people that get to be a part of that. But it doesn't necessarily have an impact on what a buyer is doing. And it doesn't necessarily have an impact on what a seller is doing. It just means volumes are down. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. And I was thinking, it's the people that use real estate as like a trading vessel, mm-hmm. right? The home flippers, they're the ones that are most affected. People that are like, hey, look, we're moving.
Yeah.
Well, then you're probably selling your house and buying a house. Like, hey, we're moving to Reading, or we're leaving Reading. It's like it doesn't matter what interest rates are. You have to do it. The market is what the market is. It's the people that are like, hey, I'm flipping homes. Yep. We're investors and realtors. Those are the ones. Oh, and lenders.
Yeah.
Those are the ones that are like,
they're feeling it.
It's just like when the stock market goes up and down. The stock market went down big time, and my financial advisor, called me, hey, how are you doing? Like he's being proactive, right? And I was like, fine. He's like, oh, well,
it's a good time to buy. Rates are down, or
the market's done this, the market's done that. And I'm like, that's cool. And he's like, he tells me it's nice because you're relaxed. Like he's like, he's like, when the market goes down, I'm getting punished with phone calls. Yeah. And I'm like, wow, it sounds like day traders that have a broker. Like, why, if you're a day trader, just do it yourself. But, people that are watching the market that close, that's different than people are like, hey, look, I'm going to retire in 16 years.
Exactly.
I just want more money in there than I put in, and some kind of tax, a little bit of a tax right off at the end of the year. Like at least I put that money away.
Yep.
And so when I talk to people in the market, not like I talk a lot, but people they're just not talking about real estate the way they were. No one's upset, but there was a time there last year where everybody was watching all the home flipping shows. And so they were all like, I'm thinking about just like, flipping some houses. I'm like, okay, good luck with that. But that's a TV show.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? They've got a $1 million per episode budget. So when they tell you they made that on the house, because you watch them and there's no way they made that. There's no way. They're like, oh yeah, we completely redid this kitchen for $32,000. Like, no, wrong.
Yeah.
No way. It was $32,000 in tile alone. You know. So that's just, people have just calmed down a little bit.
I think so too, and I think that's the story really is that things are just getting. I've got a minute left. Things are just getting a bit more normal. It's not as exciting as it was before when you see prices growing by 20% in a year. So obviously we're seeing the markets flatten out, and so a lot of that excitement's going away. A lot of agents that came into the business are having a hard time, just as a result of the inventory or the demand going down. And so you're going to see that. I mean, I've seen that a few times in my career. I've been doing this for like 23 years, and I've seen this a few times now where just you get a lot of people come in and things get disrupted, and a lot of people go back out, and so.
I've got suggestions for those people that need that fix. Those people, what I mean? Those people like, hey, with the market, if you want some volatile, you want to get involved, you want to put your money at play, and go down to your local farmer's market, because food is escalating quickly. So you could buy some tomatoes and then go down 6 and sell the tomatoes and cantaloupe. You know what I mean? So if you're not getting that fix with real estate or the stock market, just remember the farmer's market on Saturdays and Thursday.
All right. Yeah. With that, I guess we'll end on that note then. So if it's not working, consider farming.
Thank you, Josh. Appreciate it.
All right.
If you're enjoying the All Things Real Estate podcast, please feel free to subscribe, rate, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. That helps others find the show, and we really appreciate it. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode.